I read recently about somebody who was bemoaning the state of biblical illiteracy, even among Christians and in a church. And he shared the story about a church where just received a young pastor. And when the young pastor came along, he decided that what he's going to do first is go around and visit each Sunday school class. And so he began his first Sunday by visiting a boys' class, a Sunday school class. And he asked the boys, "Would you tell me, please, who knocked down the wall of Jericho?" The boys were silent, and then they began to look at each other and began to deny it. They said, "I didn't do it," and "I didn't do it." The other said, "I didn't do it. I wasn't anywhere near it." The young minister was absolutely appalled. He was disgusted. He couldn't believe the lack of biblical knowledge, the biblical ignorance, and he called a parish council meeting. So he went to the council meeting, and he began to tell them what had happened. He said, "I went to this Sunday school class of boys, and I asked them who knocked down the wall of Jericho, and none of them knew." And then there was silence. And finally, a veteran of disputes, church disputes, if I said to the minister, I said, "Now, minister, listen. It appears that this matter is bothering you. But I have known these boys since they were born. And if they said they do not know, they do not know. I believe them. Let's just get some money out of the repair and maintenance fund and fix the wall and get on with it." Our biblical knowledge is far less than our parents, and certainly far less than our grandparents' generation. And one of the reasons for this is that we have been catapulted into postmodern culture, the postmodern world, with such speed that it served to isolate us from the Word of God. Let me stop and explain to you what postmodern culture is, what it means, and why it has served to isolate us and root us away from the Word of God. The Bible said in 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32, that the men of Issachar, basically the Bible saying they were men of wisdom. And the reason for this is because they said the men of Issachar understood the times, or in some translation, they had understanding of the times. And if there is one tragedy among Christians today, is that they have ceased to understand the times in which we live. Historians have divided the history of Western civilization into three periods, what they call the pre-modern, the modern, and the postmodern. The pre-modern times began with the collapse of the Roman Empire in the beginning of the 4th century. In the beginning of the 4th century, people interpreted reality in terms of their knowledge of the Word of God. Their worldview was dominated by the knowledge of the Word of God. It was a time of the great St. Augustine and so many other great thinkers. But gradually, Christianity became distorted. It became disfigured as the authority of the Roman Catholic Church replaced the teaching of the Bible, which ushered in the middle period called the modern period in the beginning of the 14th century. During the modern period, there were two competing ideas. There were two competing worldviews. There was the Reformation and there was the Renaissance. The Reformation placed God supreme, and therefore man with the power to glorify God in every human endeavor. The Renaissance, on the other hand, gradually made man to be at the center of the stage. Renaissance gradually made man to displace God as the focus. The cry of the time was, "I think, therefore I am." Secularism, which is a direct descendant of the Renaissance period. One historian put it right when he said that was the beginning of when God was dethroned and man was enthroned. And in the light of this, there was a group of men and women on the continent who sought to get away from this modernist atmosphere. And they sought to develop a society in a new world where God and His Word dominate, where God and His Word are supreme, where God and His Word would occupy the center stage. And they landed on Plymouth Rock. But by the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, came the attitude that man can do anything if he puts his mind to it. And that was the beginning of the postmodern period, the postmodern era. Postmodernism did not begin in the 60s as a lot of people think. It really hasn't. Postmodernism began to impact society, and they began to see the effect of it in the 20s. When you say, well, how do I understand that? Let me characterize postmodern thinking for you. The pursuit of truth is meaningless. The idea of morality, it's an obsolete. The concept of authority is outmoded. Honesty, well, that's just for the fools. Truth is relative. And by the late 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, here we are. Literally, our day is filled with impact of that kind of thinking upon our lives, your life and mine. It's in the movies that we see. It's in the television shows that you watch. It's in the books that you read. It's in the words that teachers teach. It's in the halls of academia. It's in the business world. It's in the courts of law. It's in the boardrooms. It's in the shop floor. And yes, it is in the church institution today. And you say, how would I recognize that in my sphere of influence? I want to give you some examples. Let me give you some practical ways to recognize this in your life, whether you're in business, whether you're a student in school, whether you're a housewife at home. Here's the first thing. The first symptoms of postmodern thinking that has invaded our culture. Every opinion is equally right. It's number one, mark it down. Every opinion is equally right. Those who assume authority have no right to do so. Husbands, spiritual heads of their homes, well, that is just belong to the dark ages. Children are under the authority of their parents. That ought to become illegal. The authority of the Word of God is just the church's way of keeping people under their control. The absolutes of God, well, they're just your interpretation. You try to stand up and say, but God says there is right and there is wrong. They say, yes, but the Bible is an archaic book. The second way postmodern thinking has invaded our minds, our homes, our businesses, and our schools is this. Style is far more important than substance. Style is far more important than substance. Outward appearance is far more important than inward commitment. And that is why you find that one of the fast-growing professions are the spin doctors. The spin doctors who try to tell you what you should think about what you just saw. In politics, in business, and yes, in the institutional church. Even in the church today, people talk more about a church's style of music than the quality of teaching and preaching of the Word of God. Postmodern thinking says that you create an impression that you want to create. Impression is everything. Appearances is all that matters. Packaging is more important than content. Outward appearance is more important than inward reality. And that is why Hollywood make-believe today is blurring the line in the minds of the young ones between what is real and what is unreal. And the third symptom is this. In postmodern world, words have no inherent meaning.